Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Play Castlevania Circle of the Moon. In the last part we finished off our journeys in the underground waterway and got ourselves the rock feather, allowing us to do a super jump high up into the sky. And this part's pretty much going to be entirely us exploring parts of the castle that the rock's feather now allows us to access. Wait, actually no. The Roc Wing, sorry. I think I even called it the rock's feather last time on and off again. That's the name of an item from the Zelda series that has a very similar function, ultimately. So if I have been flip-flopping between that, sorry about that. So the first thing we want to grab is this heart max up that's just up here. We got it in this room earlier for another item up there, but we couldn't get this one just yet, as it was just too high of a jump, even if you can freeze those brain guys properly. Our main destination here in the chapel tower at the moment is another room where we can push a block right over here for another stat max up. But there's another block we can push towards where we fought Adramalek that allows us to access a whole new chunk of this area we could not access prior. Also, because one's on screen, we actively haven't gone out of the way to grind the Archdemon's DSS card yet. And the main reason for that is actually that I want to wait until we're back in the underground warehouse for that. Pretty much every single Archdemon you find outside of that area is behind a push block in areas like that room right there. There's even one similar one over in the catacombs that we saw earlier, I believe. But there's one specific Archdemon at the very start of the underground warehouse that's on the near side of the block that you can push in that room and not the far side. And the time I would say by not having to push a heavy ring block over and over again is why I'd actively recommend killing that exact instance of one of those enemies to get that specific card. But we'll take care of that in, I think a few minutes. I think we do that today. While we get on our way to our next destination, let's get back to talking about this game's dev staff. Next up is the sound producer, Tomoya Tomita. He started as a sound designer on Konami's Quarth on the MSX back in 1990, and continued working for Konami through to the early 2000s. While there, he was either a sound designer, composer, or sound director on titles like Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake, TMNT 3 Manhattan Project on the NES, Poppin' Twinbee, Dracula X on Super Nintendo, Mystical Ninja starring Goemon on the N64, Castlevania 64 and Legacy of Darkness, Rakuga Kids, and the Game Boy Color Beatmania and Poppin' Music titles. Alongside several other titles, admittedly. Post-Konami, he largely worked with Goodfeel Incorporated, doing sound effects and music for games like Wario Land Shake It, Yoshi's Woolly World, and Miiforce. His most recent project is disconnected from them though, so he may have left Goodfeel. Namely, his most recent project is a game called, it's either Go or Goth, I would assume, G-O-G-H, all lowercase, where he once again did music and sound effects. That seems to be another type of Pomodoro timer focus idle game type deal, like that On Together game that's been big relatively recently, and I've messed around with it with some buddies even. The next credit up is the senior producers, namely Keita Kawaminami and Etsunobu Ebisu. Kawaminami started as a bug checker on The Adventures of Bayou Billy before being a designer on the second Goemon game, period. They also did graphics and animations on Tiny Toon Adventures, Buster Busts Loose, were a planner on Mystical Ninja starring Goemon for the N64, produced the Game Boy Color Poppin' Music titles and Konami Crazy Racers, but then they also left Konami around the mid-2000s to work with Goodfeel, where they've remained since. They were a planner on Wario Land Shake It, the assistant director on Kirby's Epic Yarn, produced Woolly World's original Wii U release, directed the localization for Princess Peach Showtime, and wrote text for the just recently released Yoshi and the Mysterious Book. You might be sensing a trend here at the moment, by the way. There's a reason for that, and Etsunobu Ebisu is partially responsible. He started as a programmer on The Adventures of Bayou Billy and the second Goemon game before programming the original Kid Dracula on NES, was a planner on Batman Returns for the Super Nintendo, was the chief director for Mystical Ninja starring Goemon on the N64, produced the N64 Castlevania titles, and those same Konami rhythm games in the Game Boy Color we've mentioned so many times across this LP. Alongside every Disney sports game Konami put out on the GBA, like the other recent names, in the late 2000s, he left Konami to join Goodfeel, being producer on Wario Land Shake It, Kirby's Epic Yarn, Miiforce, Yoshi's Woolly World, Bakaru on Switch, Yoshi and the Mysterious Book, alongside being the producer and director for Princess Peach Showtime. The Goodfeel trend in these last few names is due to him and the executive producer of this very game, Shigeharu Umezaki, as they are Goodfeel's co-founders. I'll talk more on that in a moment though. A moment ago we actually found the next warp point in the castle. It's one of the more out of the way ones, but in doing so we made our way down here to this room where we find ourselves the Fallen Angel. This enemy has a DSS card for us, and they are very damaging at this point in the game because you're really not meant to be here until at least after the next area. Fallen Angels have about 370 HP, which isn't too much, but they definitely do a lot of damage for my health at this point in the game. Their common drop is a Heart EX at a 2% base drop rate. But they have our next DSS card at a 1.2% drop rate at base, which Isn't the rarest, but it's far from the most common. With that said, I've put myself in some pretty dire straits here health-wise, and I'm hoping that the Legions here will help me out with that alongside the HP up that's over here, because the Legion enemies over here, whenever you touch them, they curse you. And similarly to the Marionette enemies, they have a pretty high chance at a 5% base drop rate of dropping the Cure Curse item, but they have a 0.5% at base chance to drop a Potion High, which would really help me in these instances. Welcome to the most out-of-the-way area in the game, though, the Battle Arena, which I am not bothering with until very near the end of the LP. It's like the second to last thing we're going to do in the LP, period. If you're here as early as I am, you are not ready for the Battle Arena, not by a long shot. The Battle Arena is best handled in your early to mid-50s level-wise, but if you're ballsy and know what you're doing, you can get it done pretty comfortably within your late 40s level-wise. I think at this point in the game, I'm at best in my early to mid-30s, so yeah, not a good level for that. The only reason I'm over here right now is to grab the Warp Point, the stat max-ups that are over here, as well as the DSS card from the Fallen Angel, just so I have it ahead of time. This can be a dangerous farm, but thankfully the EXP that the Fallen Angels and top of the Legions give you should give you level ups along the way pretty regularly. It took me between 17 and 20, I think, Fallen Angels for the card to actually drop, which is overall not the worst grind I've done for this card in my years. Our reward here is ultimately the Saturn card. This is a fun one that I barely mess with. The Saturn card, when paired with the various attribute cards, summons elemental familiars with some little bonus effects. Saturn in the Salamander, for instance, summons a bat familiar that shoots fireballs whenever Nathan attacks. The Serpent summons a ghost that stalks enemies. The Mandragora summons an owl that arcs projectiles at targets. The Golem summons a hawk that's very aggressive to enemies. Cockatrice summons a friendly Medusa head that can stone enemies outright. Griffin summons a fairy that shoots, I think, a similar wind projectile to the Diana combo with the Griffin card. And the Thunderbird, for what we have it now, summons a crow that zaps enemies on contact. Fun, but a bit unwieldy in some combos, especially for my tastes, especially as late in the game as we get it. On Magician mode, this is a much easier card to play around with the combos with and find fun ways to mess around with it, but far from something I'm going to use any kind of regularly in this LP. With that done, our next objective is to actually use the Warp Room over here to go clean up some map tiles in areas near Warp Room. Specifically, we're going to head over to the Audience Chamber and deal with some of the map tiles towards the east of this area. While we do that, let's talk to the executive producer of this game and future Goodfield co-founder Shigeharu Umezaki. He started as a programmer on Ganbare Goemon Karakuri Dochu, the original Goemon title Konami ever put out. He then directed Life Force, Contra NES, Blades of Steel, Gradius 2, and Super C all in a row, which is a nuts track record. He did boss design stuff for Legend of the Mystical Ninja on Super Nintendo, programmed Buster Butts Loose, and as a producer on a lot of the titles we've seen across the rest of this staff's resumes. Batman Returns on Super Nintendo, Parodius on PS1, Rakuga Kids, the Game Boy Color Konami Rhythm titles, Konami Crazy Racers, many of the Konami Disney Sports titles on GBA, and he ended his career at Konami as an executive producer on Castlevania Dawn of Sorrow and Castlevania Curse of Darkness. He then co-founded Goodfield and was a senior producer on Wario Land Shake It, Luxley's Lineup, Kirby's Epic Yarn, and his most recent credit is the Wii U release of Yoshi's Woolly World. Now, there's a reason I actively talk this game's staff so extensively, but I'll talk more about that in a moment, because there's actually two enemies in this room I want to talk about. First off, there's the skeleton athletes who just try to ram into you outright at high speeds. Their common drop is the cotton clothes item you can find at the start of the game, but their rare drop is also the Griffin attribute card if you haven't gotten that yet, though it is much rarer than it is from the Siren, at notably a 0.75% base drop chance. The other enemy is another rendition of the scary candle here. This is the Mimic Candle. I am not going to be able to kill this across this LP. Mimic Candles have 990 HP, fade after only a few seconds like the cousin we saw in the Machine Tower, and are only found in this very out-of-the-way room. Summons paired with the stopwatch are probably your best bet for trying to kill them. Their common drop is a basic card item at a 10% base drop rate, but their rare drop at a 2% base drop rate is the Gambler Armband. If you get that item, your ability to get other drops skyrockets. The Gambler Armband boosts Nathan's luck by 100 at the cost of 25 strength, 25 defense, and 25 intelligence. With that said, it being such a rare drop as it is from an enemy that's absurdly hard to kill makes it very unreliable if you're playing on Thief mode where your base luck is boosted up into absurd levels. So going back to the game staff now. I've liked talking about the game development staffs and games across my LPs for a good little bit now. I think that started around the time I did Wario Land 1 in specific. Because you can get a pretty good image of a team from that. If there's a lot of people who are on the same projects and all that, you might start to see some similarities in how some things are handled across those and all that. But think carefully through the games I listed for a lot of these developers in this game's case. A lot of sports games, especially on handheld, some rhythm games on the Game Boy Color, a lot of Goemon games which are adventure games but very different from this. Even Castlevania as a series was pretty rarely mentioned amongst the games those developers worked on. Usually if it was either Castlevania 64, Legacy Darkness, and the more recent developers we mentioned, or Dracula X on Super Nintendo in some cases. And that was really it outside of like Curse of Darkness and Dawn of Sorrow being mentioned in the executive producers' roles, right? When viewed with all of that information in hand, the reason for all of this game's odd eccentricities and off-feeling notes compared to many other games in this series, let alone this genre, starts to come into focus. For a majority of the team, it was their first Metroidvania they ever made. They were more used to Goemon-type adventure titles, rhythm games, racers, so many things far from what this genre usually entails. And when viewed through that lens, honestly, this game is pretty impressive for a first go. Like, they clearly were told to and then actively did look at Symphony of the Night and were told to make their own version of that and had some vision for how to do so. But along the way made many choices that hampered this or that in ways very similar to what many indie games in this genre I've done have played, for better or worse. And while I'm ultimately glad Igarashi and a lot of his people were brought back to work on Harmony of Dissonance Beyond, from that lens, I honestly can't help but wonder what would have happened if this team got to make another one of these, like be it a direct follow-up to Circle of the Moon or just another game done by them specifically in this style. Because with what they learned from this on top of feedback, I genuinely think they could have made a really solid second one. Now admittedly, that's a pretty common paradigm in the gaming sphere, indie or otherwise. It's actually why I'm very curious how Time Spinner 2 is going to turn out, because Time Spinner 1 was alright, but I'm curious on what they can really do to make Time Spinner 2 great, for instance. And heck, not for nothing, I actively felt that way about Axiom Verge as well. Axiom Verge 1 was pretty neat. Axiom Verge 2, I adored. What I will say ultimately is that the very unique circumstances of Circle of the Moon's development, between the main producer not working on it and most of the team not being on these types of games normally to begin with, does lead to it having a very unique feel that I think at best is hit or miss. I'm not a fan of this one, but I know several people still have this as one of their favorites, if not their favorite, in this specific series. And I can see why it's ultimately just not very much for me. At this point, though, we're actively exploring an area we've seen the lead up to for a good while now. We're actively in the room towards the top right of the machine tower that we first saw the way to on our way out of the machine tower the first time around. There's actively some enemies here that we haven't seen before, including the Werehorse, but there's also the Were-Jaguar that we saw on the way towards where the battle arena was. The Were-Jaguars are just reskins of the Were-Panthers we first saw at the Chapel Tower. Their common drop is now the gold armor at a relatively high 2.5% base drop rate, but it's a little easily outclassed at this point. Their rare drop, though, is the Ninja Garb, which is a bit of an oddball armor piece in my eyes. The Ninja Garb boosts Nathan's defense by 80 and his strength by 30, which at this point in the game is too low of a defense boost to be worth even the strength boost, I'd say. If you could get that maybe before the dragon zombies in some form, I'd say that'd be a nice upgrade to have for the mid-game, but as late as we are in, there's much better options for you defensively or offensively. The Werehorse, on the other hand, they're technically only found in that room, but they do have a cousin you can find in a couple of rooms in one of the areas we've yet to explore in the castle. Their main attack is to swing their hammer down, which causes a decently large shockwave to go in front of them for a little bit. Drop-wise, their common drop isn't too interesting. They have a 1.5% chance at base to drop the meat item, which is a little outdated at this point for how much it'll heal you for, but if you want to farm up healing items, that's far from the worst option you can get, really. It's just that they're pretty out of the way to actively farm up. Their rare drop, on the other hand, is much more interesting, albeit it's not much rarer than their common drop at a 1% base drop rate. Their rare drop is the Defense Armband, which is a lot like the Gambler Armband we talked about earlier in this very video, in that it boosts the main stat it focuses on by a pretty high number, namely it boosts Nathan's defense by 100, while lowering the rest of his stats by 25. While it is still a decently rare drop, I'd say the Defense Armband is a much more worthwhile farming target than the Gambler Armband, if only because defense matters so much more in the short and long term no matter what. Because there's always going to be some odd hit here and again in some boss fights that does a lot of damage, and that extra 100 can go a long way in reducing the amount it actively deals to you. What's honestly a decent strategy for the later chunk of the game until you get potentially better setups going is actively getting the defense armband from a werehorse and its strength-based cousin, the strength armband from an enemy in an area we're going to be exploring in the near future, and stacking them both up. That ultimately means those two stats are only boosted by 75 instead of 100, alongside lowering both your int and luck by 50. But in boss fights, those are the two main stats you're going to be focusing on anyway, so it ultimately plays out pretty well. Now that we have the Roc Wing, we can also finally go get that item that's all the way back here at the entrance of the castle. You can technically trick out the game to get that earlier than what I did here, namely by using the double jump and kicking boots in a specific fashion after freezing the flame armor that's in there to use as a platform, but it's just tricky enough where I figured I'd mess it up for long enough that it wasn't worth my time to grab as early as we physically could. And on that note, worth noting, one of the weirder notes to Circle of the Moon to me in a very minor way is that we actively don't start at the entrance of the castle. Every other game in this series that plays like this, you start either directly at the entrance of the castle or just somewhere else, period, like you do in Ecclesia and technically Dawn of Sorrow. At this point, though, I'm finally farming the Archdemon for their DSS card. They drop the Apollo action card. This card's combos work similarly to the summons we've already used, in that after activating the combo with L, you need to input a half circle movement on your D-pad, starting from down, moving forward, and then up, pressing B as you finish that input. Doing this causes Nathan to throw what the card description calls bombs, but actively come down to being way more than just bombs. The Salamander combo, though, is, as we just saw, a box standard bomb item that explodes on contact. The Serpent combo throws an ice shard that becomes a spread shot after making contact with an enemy, wall, or floor. The Mandragora combo throws a rose that drops damaging petals down as it arcs. The Golem combo raises 5 spikes from the floor. The Cockatrice combo summons meteors that shatter into further damaging shards on contact with an enemy. The Manticore combo throws a minorly damaging poison bomb. The Griffin combo generates a small tornado of sorts that shoots projectiles both to the left and right. And the Thunderbird combo throws a sticky bomb that continually zaps the enemy for a few moments. These combos can be actively pretty useful in some instances, especially at reaching enemies who are at some awkward angles compared to you on smaller platforms. With that said, I'm a reckless enough player where I don't really use it too much. I'll try to just get in the enemy's face and kill them before they can attack me in most cases. This is something I also find ultimately more useful on Magician mode because you can use all those combos from the start, and that can really make for some easier sections, especially against certain boss fights where if you place yourself on the right platform, you're just completely invincible to the enemy's attacks, like Camilla. Welcome back to the Underground Warehouse, by the way, because I haven't said that yet. We're mostly only here for the Apollo card, but there are a lot of stat max-up items I'm grabbing along the way here as well, now that we have the Roc Wing. There is one specific enemy I could have shown off at this point actively that spawns in only after defeating Camilla. It's in the hidden room in this specific vertical shaft on the right wall that we're going to pass in a few moments. But I decided to hold off on showcasing the enemy until a little later, because the experience that it drops will be more worth my time to do at that specific point. Though not for nothing, if you wanted to, you could farm a decent armor from it. It's just extraordinarily rare, especially for the HP value of the enemy in question. Once we finish grabbing items here in the Underground Warehouse, our next destination is to actively do another lap through the Catacombs area from the start of the game to grab some items we can grab there now. Though one of our destinations is technically not a part of the Catacombs or Abyss Stairway for a reason I haven't mentioned yet. Namely, the area where we started the game in, both in terms of the starting cutscene as well as where we first gained control, the room that Dracula made us fall down from and otherwise, is a separate area called the Sealed Room. But there's never any text that shows up to name the area that in the game itself, though there is some programmed in apparently that you need to use Game Shark codes in some form to actively call up. I don't know why that happened. I'm assuming it's technically an oversight by the game first making you take control in the region or something. It's just a weird little oversight. But in specific, in that first shaft that Dracula made us fall down in is our next destination, as there is actively a hidden room along one of the walls there that I think you could theoretically get maybe by just timing a kick boot properly alongside a double jump while falling back into that shaft. But it's just a lot more reliable to use the Roc Wing to ascend up to the area you need to get to and then find the fake wall that you can break open. It is also decently high up in the room in question. Though there is also another reason I've waited until now to go to this specific room. Namely, while you can get here earlier if you time yourself correctly, there is actively an enemy in this set of rooms we're going to that only spawns in after defeating Camilla. And it's technically one of the other hardest enemies in the game to kill outside of, like, the Mimic Candle back in the audience chamber. This room itself looks pretty harmless, but that's because there's another hidden wall up here that takes us to this room. You hear that little clackle right there? We didn't get to really see the enemy in question, but that's because they are a faster version of the skeleton athlete enemy we saw earlier, the skeleton medalist. We physically cannot kill the skeleton medalist at this point in time because we need another DSS combo that we do not have access to just yet. And their drops are definitely a little bizarre. Their common drop is a 10% base drop rate of the toy ring. This ring does absolutely nothing for your stats in any way, it's just a joke drop. Their real drop is their rare drop at a 1% base drop rate, the bear ring. That seems to do nothing on its own as well at first, but if you use it in tandem with another DSS combo, it actively changes the effect of that combo into something else I'll talk about when we actively get the DSS combo in question. At this point, though, we're finally back in the deeper reaches of the Catacombs area. We haven't been this deep in the area since the start of the game, more or less. And I could have come here periodically throughout the game to get some of the items, like the MP up we just grabbed that was behind one of the stone blocks that we needed the tackle shoulder pad to break. But there's one item in specific you are just unable to grab in this general region until after you've defeated Camilla. And it's not for mobility reasons, because it's not something you need the Roc Wing to get. It's because there's a new enemy that spawns in this general vicinity after defeating Camilla that has our next DSS card for us. And they are pretty out of the way. In specific, they're actively all the way back in the boss room that we fought the Cerberus in back in part 2. Is this very out of the way in most instances compared to where you need to be in the game and where you actively defeat Camilla? Yes. Is it worth farming? Also yes. How you're supposed to know that this is there outside of just exploring the castle needlessly trying to find the last cards you're missing? I don't know. I guess the strategy guide technically would have labeled that, but that's not exactly an uncommon thing across this series, is it technically? Like, how are you supposed to know what enemies drop what outside of just farming each enemy until they have all their drops listed, getting lucky, or finding a strategy guide in some form, I suppose? We're not going to be doing that farm today, though. That's going to be for the next video, mostly because I tried to keep the videos for this LP around 20 minutes, give or take 2 or 3 minutes in either direction at large. But with that, I'm going to need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, and in part 10, we're going to go grab the DSS card that's here waiting for us in the Catacombs before moving on to the next main region of the castle. See you guys then.